So in today's video, we are completely taking apart and rebuilding a customer's pair of 875s. This particular rebuild, we are going for the stacked soles in beige/tan with the honey 1220 unit attached to the bottom of that. The customer has also requested new welts. This is an interesting rebuild in the sense that for the longest time I have wanted to find and offer to my customers the split reverse welt with the faux Norwegian stitching like you get on the 1907 boot by Red Wing. However, no matter how hard I searched, I couldn't find it available in this country. I messaged several other cobblers to try and source it, but I got no response, or the response was not positive. So I sort of shelved that idea. However, this customer was pretty relaxed and happy to wait until I did find it. So with his enthusiasm in mind, I continued to search. I did find a company that was willing to manufacture it for me, but there was a minimum order of like 1,000 meters, and unless I was willing to sell one of my kidneys, I probably wasn't going to put that on the shelves. So I did then find a company that was willing to sell me a much smaller quantity, and I get to keep my kidneys. So I have ordered a reasonable amount of that, enough to do this and many other boots. So you will now find split reverse faux Norwegian stitch welting on the website as an option if you were looking to get your boots re-welted like the 1907s. Anyway, let's get started. So I'm going to pause this video for a second to talk about welts, because I just don't talk about welts enough. So in this particular video, we are looking at a new type of welt, and we're re-welting a pair of shoes. There is actually no real reason here, other than for aesthetic purposes, to change these welts. The whole concept of welted footwear is that you can reuse that welt multiple times. By multiple times, I mean you could use it as many times as you can before it becomes too perforated in order to continue using it, or if somebody sanded too much material away and you can't stitch it any longer. But essentially, you can keep using it until you can no longer use it. So the main reason why a manufacturer might refuse to repair a pair of shoes, which I have seen several videos titled recently, is that pretty much all mass-produced footwear that has a welt attached to it, that will have been done by a machine. It's not possible to hand welt fast enough that you could produce enough shoes to make a business profitable, I suspect. I'm sure that there is somebody doing it. But if you're machine welting, because there's loads of different types of welts, I'm not going to specify any particular one, just that you're either welting by hand or you're welting by machine. If you're machine welting, machines are doing it blind, and each time that they stitch a hole, they make a hole, unless they accidentally hit one of the original holes if you were doing it twice. A lot of manufacturers will limit the number of re-welts that you can have to 3. That's because each time that the machine re-welts that shoe, it can't see or doesn't care where the original holes are. Every effort will be made by the repairer or manufacturer to use the original holes, but no matter how good you are, there is an element of human error. So if, when that's being stitched the first time, the person doing it pushes, pulls, sneezes, blinks, coughs, has a lapse in concentration for a second, they could pull that stitching, which was at 5 stitches per inch, just for example, they could pull it to 4 stitches per inch. They will immediately return back at any point in time to 5 stitches per inch. But by pulling back that original one, the difference between the first stitch, or the first 5 stitches at 5 per inch, is now different to the last set of 5 per inch, if that makes sense. So that is just welting, so attaching the welt itself. On top of this, you have then got reusing the original welt. Leather, unlike textiles, when you stitch it, you make a hole. It doesn't move, well, it does move the fibers out of the way, but the fibers do not go back where they once were. So with fabric, you could sew that, undo your stitching, take all of the stitches out, ruffle up a bit, and all of the fabric would go back more or less to where it was before if you were using a blunt needle, and you wouldn't be able to see where you had sewn previously. But with leather, it stabs a hole through it, and that doesn't really close back up. So when you stitch through the welt, you make a set of holes which don't go away. So the second time that you go to use that welt, it's the same as it was with attaching a welt. The original person that stitched the sole on, if they had their machine set up at 5 stitches per inch, and I set my machine up at 5 stitches per inch, but 3 seconds into starting his job, he blinks and pulled that to 4 stitches per inch, I'm not going to blink or cough at the same time as he did, not repeatedly. So my stitching will now be off for as long as it takes before I accidentally, or my machine moves around a little bit and compensates for that original stitch that was off, and now I'll end up back in the original welt holes. So sometimes you get, I don't want to use luck, but sometimes you get lucky and you hit every single one of those original stitch holes. It's so much more likely on a much newer welt that you would do that, because the welt itself and shoe are not going to be stretched or deformed in any way, so you've got a much stronger chance of hitting those original stitch holes. But once the shoe is old, stretched, well worn, dented in at the toe, maybe they've been scuffing the tips of their toes as they go up steps, the spacing between the outside edge of the welt to the stitch holes will be different than it was at the factory, but it'll also be different to what it is on the side of the shoe or somewhere that is less exposed to wear. So the purpose of this whole thing is just to explain that original manufacturers may refuse to resole a shoe because it's been resoled the maximum number of times before it becomes a non-cost-effective repair for them as a manufacturer, because they need to do high numbers and high volume fast in order to make money, because they are such a big business. Smaller businesses, cobblers and shoe repairers, we've got time on our hands. So we can stitch stuff by hand, reusing all of the original holes, and that allows us to welt an infinite amount of times. You could, in theory, stitch on outsoles, reusing the original holes through the welt, but the time that it takes in order to do that probably offsets against having new welts fitted. Plus, with new welts, you can never guarantee perfect stitching, but with new welts, you've got a much higher chance of getting perfect looking stitches if you can not sneeze or blink. So, having watched that back, pretty sure I didn't actually cover the reason why you wouldn't be able to reuse them. So, essentially, it comes down to Holes, too many holes. There is too many holes in whichever end it is. So a welt has two sets of stitches in it. One of them goes into the upper through the gemming or through a footbed, loads of different ways of doing it, but one of them goes through the upper. By the third time, there's a high percentage, not guaranteed, there's a high percentage chance that there is more holes than there were originally. And up to a certain point, that's okay, but there's going to be a threshold, and a lot of manufacturers are just assuming that after 3 welts being attached, there's going to be too many holes in the upper and gemming. Like perforated paper, it'll tear along that line. So once you've done it too many times and there is too many holes, you've introduced a weak point, and that will tear. It could tear in the process of taking a shoe apart, but it will tear along that weak point. And the same goes with the welts. Not often have I seen a welt that's been stitched so many times that it can't be used for that reason. It is normally because somebody sanded too close to the original stitches, or somebody mullered it on something else and wore them away. But essentially it's the same thing. Once somebody has reused a welt to stitch on an outsole too many times, there is too many holes, and it's effectively more hole than it is leather, and therefore won't hold a stitch. It will tear, and the stitches could pull through and make the whole part. Considering it's the foundation of a resole, it will make that part redundant. Fingers crossed that covered it. That's everything on this pair of 875s. They have had the stacked sole package, which originally was supposed to be beige and tan. However, when we got to the point of actually choosing the soles, I offered everything up to the customer and allowed him to choose, and he chose to have the tobacco version of the jankaut 1220 added onto the bottom of his wedge soles. Also, I think we mentioned at the beginning of this that I managed to find split welt with a faux stitch in the reverse part that comes up the shoe, very similar to the 1907. And that was pleasant to use. Not as nice to use as your standard flat welt or the normal storm, as you had to pay extra attention to ensure that that little lip was always upright against the shoe. You may also notice that the shoes now, be difficult to see from over there, but the shoes now have a lighter coloured edge to the midsole and welt. And that's because once I had finished everything up, sent the pictures over to the customer, he actually preferred the look of the edges when they were more rough sanded. So I sat down with a piece of coarse sandpaper and roughed them all back up again. A good example of how everybody is very different, and it's nice to offer all of these different options to people. On that subject of options, I have now added to the website the stacked sole package with actual customizable options. So instead of just purchasing stacked soles and then having to deal with me sending you lots and lots of pictures of all the different options, I've put everything on the website so that you can choose before placing your order what you would like it to look like. It would be nice if the website had more facilities and I could actually give you the image of a finished result, but I can't link those images to each individual option that you choose. All I can do is put pictures of finished shoes up for you to peruse first, and then as you choose options, it will drop through to more relevant images. So as always, I'll put a link in the description below that will take you to the website where you will find this exact package along with a whole bunch of others, and I will also include in the description a discount code to get you 10% off of all resoles ordered through the website. See you in the next one.